and that was very disheartening because as someone who's also a biracial person, it's been very important for me to be a part of a dialogue in which white people are included in the work of trying to transform racism and trying to take accountability for racism and trying to work closely with people of color in ways that are ultimately helpful for the community at large. And so I started to feel this growing theoretical sense that if we didn't find a way to bridge and we didn't find a way to work together, that it was really what we were going to see was the growth of a kind of matriarchal power base to the detriment of not the men who are in power, though they certainly suffer some byproducts, but primarily the men who are not in positions of power and do not have access to the kinds of resources that certain classes and education levels of men do. So that was one of the reasons that I began to distance myself in many ways from the traditional feminist community. There were other reasons, but that was a primary one. And then the birth of my son had a great impact, but at the time I decided to do my third book, which was called What Makes a Man? 22 Writers Imagine the Future, which is a collection of essays primarily by men, but also by women. I was inspired to do that book by a conversation I had with the son that I was co-parenting with my ex-partner, who at that point was in the 6th grade, and he came home one day and, very, very smart kid, chess player, very into building, very sort of architecturally inclined, liked to garden, a very dynamic, creative young man, beautiful soul in the making. And I left him at school very happy. I picked him up. He was very depressed. And I began talking to him about what had happened at school. And one of the things that he said to me was, how would you feel if I started playing sports? And I was very taken aback because he had never shown much interest in sports. And I kind of probed a little, and he said, well, the only way that I'll be able to fit in, really, as a boy is to either play sports or to dominate in this digital sports gaming arena. And we had decided as a family that he wasn't going to be allowed to play violent video games, and thus he was in this cross of not being able to feel an affinity with dominating on the field, the real field, and he couldn't dominate in this virtual field. And so he felt that he had no social currency within his school. And I was really taken with that idea that we had done so much over the last 30 years, starting with Carol Gilligan's work and so many other great feminist thinkers' work, in looking at the ways in which girls have been forced into different roles and limited by the kinds of identities that have been on offer for them. But then this work around boys and what they're allowed to do has been largely unseen and unknown and sort of closeted. And that was really the beginning of not just a discussion about how masculinity is taught pedagogically in schools, because he was in a very quote-unquote progressive school at the time. And I had to raise with the teachers and the principals there, at what point are you initiating a dialogue about gender and how gender is constructed even within this educational environment. But I also became aware of the idea that young men are trained from a very young age to be gladiators in one realm or another, to fight and to be breadwinners, providers, protectors, and emotional stoics. And so I decided to talk to dozens of men about their experiences becoming men, and what I found was shocking. It was I spoke to, I would say, somewhere between 60 and 70 men, close interviews in which I asked them specifically about points at which they were directed toward masculinity, and each and every one of them talked about there being a physical threat to them when they deviated from the idea of the traditional boy or man. So at the end of my research, what I found was that there is literally a war being waged against boys, and that for many boys, the rite of passage into becoming a boy is severe teasing, serious bullying, physical altercations, and just general psychological, physical, emotional terror that is imposed on them from other men and other boys. And also what I found in talking to them, and what I had believed for a long time, was that it wasn't just men who were policing masculinity, but women also, as mothers and lovers and wives and aunts, and were also participating in this coercion, this expectation that men behave a certain way in order to gain love, acceptance, sexual pleasure, that really all of their all the goodies, all the good stuff came to them by performing this role. So on the one hand, men were brutalized by other men if they deviated, and on the other hand, women withheld things if they deviated. So that was really a big deal to me, not only because I had a son, but also because I had watched my father devote his whole life to his children and abandon his own creative desires, and because I felt a sense of obligation to raise awareness about this, because I can't imagine any group being empowered to radically transform themselves while they're both physically under attack, emotionally under attack, and simultaneously being perceived as powerful oppressors. And so I wanted to lend my voice as an ally and as someone who could testify to the experience of boys and men. And it was very difficult because as a woman, there were a lot of men who really challenged me and said, why are you speaking about masculinity? What do you know about it? And so I decided to do this collection, mostly commissioning essays by men to write about their experiences. And there were predominantly African American men in What Makes a Man writing, a few women, but mostly men, trying to both talk about what it was like growing up and being turned into a man, and then their experience trying to undo that work. And my distance from the feminist community was exacerbated by that book and by the work that I was doing around masculinity. There was less of a sense that I was a spokesperson and a figurehead on behalf of young women, and that somehow this work around masculinity detracted from that work, and that was very disappointing. And so that brings us a little bit closer to today, because there were several issues with that book, not only my relationship with feminism, but I ran into some very interesting dynamics with trying to publish that book. One of the first was that we couldn't find a way to market the book, because even to discuss the problematics of masculinity is deemed unmasculine for many men.